You are a disgrace to this family. You are no longer welcome here." My mother's words cut through the lively conversations and the sound of fireworks exploding outside, turning our New Year's party into a nightmare. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth, laden with the tenderloin I had prepared myself all morning. Around me, the dining room fell into such a deep silence that I could hear the old clock in the living room striking midnight. The same clock I had paid to have repaired last month. I searched for something, anything, on my father Robert's face. But he just stared at his plate, rearranging the potato salad he hadn't even touched. Across the table, my 17-year-old sister Sophie sat wide-eyed, staring at his half-empty glass of soda. What made this betrayal so cruel was the timing. I had spent the entire day in the kitchen roasting the tenderloin, preparing side dishes, and making 3 different desserts while they watched the game on television. Just 20 minutes ago, I had shared the news of my promotion at work. Now, as steam rose from the food I had prepared, her mother was declaring me unwanted. The irony did not escape me. His name was on the electric bill that kept these lights on the water bill that filled the glasses on this table, on the grocery receipt for every crumb of this meal, and on the insurance statement that covered his mother's doctor's appointment last week. Even so, he was the burden. My name is Arthur, and at 26, I never imagined I would be wondering if his own family saw him as nothing more than a walking ATM. 3 months ago, when Mom lost her job at the accounting firm, he took on the responsibility without hesitation. The bills piled up faster than the excuses, and Dad's part-time job at the hardware store barely covered the mortgage. I started paying for everything else: utilities, groceries, car insurance, even Mom's medical expenses. Each month, as more bills were transferred to my name, Dad became more distant, more resentful. Her signature, once necessary for everything in this house, became increasingly irrelevant, her authority diminishing. 2 weeks ago, I heard her talking to Mr. Simmons from next door, her voice reaching me through the open kitchen window. "It's not right," she complained, leaning on the fence. "A man losing control of his own house. He acts like he owns the place now." I didn't realize he was talking about me until I heard my name. Robert was staring at her now, his jaw tense, waiting for tears or protests. When she simply continued eating, his knuckles turned white as he gripped his fork. The tenderloin had no taste in her mouth, but she chewed methodically, swallowed, and took another bite. "Did you hear what I said?" Her voice rose, thick with irritation. "You need to be out by the end of the week." My hands trembled slightly, but not from fear, from something deeper, something shifting inside me. I put down my fork, placed my napkin beside my plate, and met his gaze. "I understand perfectly." Those 3 words hung in the air, not tearful or angry, but calm, almost thoughtful. Robert blinked, clearly taken aback by my composure. The silence stretched until Mom finally spoke, but not to defend me. "Arthur," she said, her voice hushed and hurried. "You're still going to pay for health insurance this month, right? I have that appointment on Tuesday." And there it was. The whole picture came into perfect, painful focus. Not family, just a financial resource. Not a son, just a signature at the bottom of the checks. I got up and collected my plate along with Sophie's empty glass. "Sure, Mom," I replied, my voice steady despite the empty feeling spreading through my chest. "I'll take care of it before I leave." If you're following this story of family manipulation, don't forget to subscribe to the channel because what I discovered in my room that night would change everything forever. As I walked to the kitchen, my mind catalogued everything in this house that bore my name. The internet service I upgraded when Sophie needed it for her studies. The refrigerator I replaced when the old one broke down in July. The utility bills transferred to me when the cutoff notices arrived. I rinsed my plate in the sink, methodically scraping the food scraps into the disposal. Through the kitchen window, I could see my car in the driveway, the only thing I owned entirely that wasn't tied to this house. At least I would have that when I left. Behind me, I heard Sophie's chair scrape across the floor as he brought his plate into the kitchen. When he set it down next to the sink, he didn't meet my eyes, but her fingertips brushed his wrist for a brief moment. It was the closest thing to support he had felt in months. The digital clock on my nightstand flashed 1:18 a.m. as I folded another sweater into my suitcase. Sleep seemed impossible with the weight of Robert's words still echoing in my ears. I had been methodically packing for hours, my movements automatic as my mind raced. I reached for the stack of financial documents I keep in her desk drawer. Insurance statements, utility bills, grocery receipts, planning to separate what I needed to take with me. But underneath them, I spotted a bank statement with his name on it. Strange. I hadn't seen paper statements in months. Everything went electronic after Mom lost her job. I pulled it out, then another, and another. A small stack of statements covering the last 3 months, all for an account he had never seen before. An account with a balance that grew each month while he drained his savings to keep the lights on. My hands shook as I slumped down on the edge of my bed. The statements blurred before my eyes until I blinked hard, forcing myself to focus on the numbers. $4,000 in July, $5,000 in August, almost $7,000 now. Leafing through the rest of the documents, I found a boat dealership brochure with Robert's handwritten notes in the margins. Entry 5,500 circled in blue ink. Scheduled delivery after New Year's double underlined. A fishing boat while I paid for Mom's doctor's appointments and the internet Sophie needed for school. There was more. A notepad with scribbled dates. January utility due dates. My name with question marks. After bills paid, written and underlined. He had been planning this for weeks, waiting until I covered January's expenses before kicking him out. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. The door opened just enough for Sophie to slip inside, her eyes wide as she took in the packed boxes and open suitcases. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, hovering near the door as if preparing for a quick escape. I sat surrounded by the physical evidence of my family's betrayal, while Sophie stood with one hand still on the doorknob. The imbalance of power did not escape me. Her freedom to leave. My forced departure. "Dad didn't give me much of a choice," I replied, tucking the bank statements into my wallet. Sophie bit her lower lip. "Mom said he needs his room for storage now that he's buying that boat." The casual confirmation hit like a physical blow. Boat. The fishing boat he put a down payment on last month. Sophie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "I've heard them planning all this for weeks. How they'd wait until you paid the January bills. You knew." Betrayal spread, creating tentacles that reached out to his Sophie. Her eyes filled with tears. "I was afraid to tell you. Dad said anyone who told you would be next." I wanted to be angry with her, but the fear on her face was too real. She was still a child navigating the same manipulative household he was escaping. "There's more," she continued, glancing nervously down the hallway. "Those doctor's appointments Mom's been going to, the ones he's been paying for with his insurance. What about them?" Last week, she came home with her lips all swollen. She told Dad that the doctor said she couldn't drink through a straw for 2 days. Sophie mimicked our mother's characteristic eye roll. "It wasn't a doctor's appointment, Arthur. It was fillers." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I was eating instant noodles 3 times a week to stretch my budget while my mother was getting cosmetic procedures done on my insurance. I pulled up my banking app, showing Sophie my account balance. $76.3 thousand, $42. 3 months ago, I had over $9,000 saved. "That's what's left of my savings after covering everything here," he told her. If he stayed another month, he'd have nothing left. The gravity of his situation crystallized as he spoke aloud. He was on the verge of financial ruin, pouring everything into a family that saw him as nothing more than an ATM. "Dad said that if you try to take any furniture, he'll report you for theft," Sophie said. "Even the things you bought?" Of course he would do that. I looked around at the desk I bought when I started working from home during the pandemic. The bookcase I assembled myself, the bedding I bought with my first paycheck. He also called the bank today about removing his name from the utility bills. The pressure of time hit me. I needed to secure housing, protect what was left of his finances, and disentangle himself from the family bills before they could cause more damage. Her reached under her bed and pulled out a shoebox. Inside were receipts for everything I had bought for the house, organized, dated, with my credit card statements attached. The desk, the new refrigerator, Sophie's laptop, the living room rug, even utility bills with my name clearly listed as the account holder. A small victory in this sea of betrayal. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that I had carried this house on my back while they conspired behind my back. Sophie watched him sort through the receipts, her expression unreadable. "Arthur," she finally asked. "Yes." What would he do in my place if he had to choose between standing up for what's right and keeping the peace in the only home he has? As I sorted through these receipts in the middle of the night, I faced a difficult choice. Should I confront my parents with evidence of her manipulation, or simply leave and let them discover the consequences on their own? Standing up for myself could bring closure, but a quiet exit would avoid a painful confrontation. What would you do when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally have proven that they only value what you provide? I looked at my sister, trapped in the same toxic environment I was escaping, and realized there was no easy answer for either of us. But as Sophie watched me with eyes full of fear and admiration, one thing became crystal clear: my quiet departure would only be the first move. The real game was just beginning, and he had no idea what was coming. 3 days later, while on his lunch break at his part-time job, my Aunt Phyllis's voice crackled over the phone, each word landing like a slap. "Honestly, Arthur, I never thought you would abandon your parents when they need you most." I gripped the phone tighter, watching my knuckles turn white. 3 days since New Year's, and Robert had already constructed his version of events for the family to consume. "Did Dad mention that he kicked me out?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. "He said you abandoned them after a minor argument," she said, her tone heavy with judgment. "They're organizing a family meeting at my house this weekend to discuss his behavior." Of course they were. A public forum where they control the narrative. "I'm sure they are," I said, and ended the call before she could respond. After my shift, I arrived at my friend's house. I sank into the edge of Drew's sofa bed, now my temporary bed. My entire life was in 4 hastily packed boxes and 2 suitcases stacked against the wall. Everything I couldn't fit in waited in my car downstairs. 26 years reduced to what I could grab in 2 frantic hours, while my parents were at church on Sunday. My phone buzzed again. Another message from a cousin who heard I broke Mom's heart. I didn't open it. The constant notifications created a new anxiety. Each alert makes my heart race, wondering which relative will attack next. When Drew returned from his shift at the hospital, he found his sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by paperwork. "Operation Financial Freedom going well?" she asked, dropping her bag near the door. "Almost done." I tapped my pen against a notebook filled with account numbers. I canceled his automatic utility payments, removed myself from the family cell phone plan, and called to have his name removed from the internet service. What I didn't mention was how the customer service representative laughed when I explained that yes, I was voluntarily removing myself from financial responsibility for my parents' bills. "Good," Drew said, settling down beside me. "His parents can clean up their own mess." The weight of starting over pressed against my chest. My savings account showed a balance that would make most financial advisors frown. 3 months of covering my family's expenses left me with barely enough for a security deposit on a place of my own, let alone first and last month's rent. "Are you sure your roommate doesn't mind me staying here?" I asked. "Max?" He's delighted to have the front door open, and Max burst in with his huge golden retriever jumping in front of him. "Arthur," Max announces, "you have to meet the worst therapist in the world, but he works for treats." He threw a tennis ball across the apartment, and Baxter shot after her, all wobbly paws and wagging tail. The dog returned, dropping the slobbery ball in my lap with expectant eyes. "He thinks you need this more than he does," Max said, her expression serious despite the ridiculousness of the moment. "Sometimes the best therapy has 4 legs and terrible breath." When Baxter nudged my hand with his wet nose, I found myself laughing for the first time in days. The sound surprised me, almost foreign to my ears. 5 days after my escape, I sat at Drew's kitchen table, laptop open to job listings that could offer better pay. My current position covered my basic needs, but not the kind of emergency fund I would need to truly rebuild. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. "What have you done?" Denise's voice came through sharp and panicked. "The power's out, the internet's down, and her insurance was denied at her appointment." I breathed slowly, feeling strangely calm. I stopped paying for things that weren't his responsibility. "But you can't just abandon us like this. We're her family." The desperation in her voice might have moved me once, but now I heard the manipulation underneath. "Family doesn't call family leeches at New Year's dinner," I said, surprised by the firmness in my voice. "Your father wasn't serious. You know how he gets." "I know. That's the problem." I ended the call and set my phone down carefully, as if it might burn me. Later that night, Drew leaned over her shoulder as I created new passwords for her email and bank accounts. "I noticed some suspicious login attempts on your accounts," she said, pointing to the security alerts. "We should set up fraud alerts, just to be safe." The contrast didn't escape me. Drew asks before borrowing my charger, while my family felt entitled to everything I owned. Even now, Drew kept a respectful distance, waiting for my response instead of grabbing the laptop to do it herself. "Good idea," he said. "Thanks." That night, I found myself browsing listings of apartments within my budget. Small studios, most of them, but they represented something I had never completely had, a space that is entirely his, where no one can tell him I don't belong. I don't ask anyone's opinion about neighborhoods or worry if the kitchens are big enough for family gatherings. The decisions are his alone. The next morning, I went to a local credit union and opened a new account in his name only. I transferred every penny from his old account, the one his parents knew about. My phone beeped with a message from Sophie. "Mom looking for her bank info. Says she needs to check something. Don't trust her." I had barely finished reading when my phone exploded with notifications. 6 missed calls from home in the last hour. Simultaneously, an email popped up. Fraud alert. Attempt to reset password on his banking app. I stared at the screen, anger rising like a tide. They weren't just trying to make me feel guilty enough to come back. They were trying to take what little I had left. A day later, the bank representative's voice carried a note of concern that felt strangely validating. "Mr. Mitchell, we've blocked 3 separate attempts to reset your password from his parents' home address in the last 24 hours. I gripped my phone tighter, pacing the small confines of Drew's guest room that had become my temporary sanctuary. "And you're sure he can't access anything?" "Positive. We've flagged her account for enhanced security measures. Any changes will require personal verification with photo ID." My chest eased slightly as I thanked her and ended the call, adding her name to my growing documentation notebook. Methodical calls yielded similar results. Credit cards secured, utilities formally removed from my name, and health insurance accounts protected with additional verification steps. The electric company representative had sounded almost impressed. "Smart move to contact us. Her mother called yesterday trying to restore service in his name without authorization." Each confirmation served as a brick in the wall I was building between my previous life and what would come next. Not a wall of anger, though that simmered beneath the surface, but one of protection. Solid, necessary, and entirely of my own design. Drew appeared at the door with a steaming mug. "Tea with honey. I thought you could use some after all those calls." I gratefully accepted, wrapping my hands around the warmth. Last one done. No one can access or change anything without my direct approval. Drew nodded approvingly. "How are you feeling?" Before I could answer, a thunderous knock shook the apartment door. Tea spilled over my fingers as Drew and I exchanged frightened glances. "Arthur." His father's voice echoed through the wood. "Open this door right now." Drew motioned for me to stay put, but I was already moving. This confrontation had been inevitable from the moment I left home. The pounding intensified as I approached. Each impact felt like a physical blow. Through the peephole, I saw my father's face, flushed and contorted with rage. The same expression I had seen directed at bill collectors, telemarketers, and now me. "I know you're in there." Another series of blows shook the door frame. "Do you think he can just abandon his family and destroy our lives?" A door opened across the hall, and Mrs. Perkins, a retiree who had baked cookies for Drew when he moved in, peered out cautiously. Her eyes widened at the sight of Robert banging and shouting. "Young man," she called, her voice shaky but determined. "I've already called building security." Robert turned to him. "Mind your own business, ma'am. This is between him and his son." "Your behavior is my business when it disturbs the peace," she retorted, pulling her robe tighter around herself. Robert turned back to the door, her voice dropping to something more dangerous. "Arthur, if you don't open this door right now, I'm going to." The threat turned into action as he stepped back and kicked the door hard enough to crack the wood around the lock. Mrs. Perkins gasped and retreated into her apartment. My hands trembled as I dialed 911, speaking softly to the dispatcher while Robert continued his assault on the door. Through the damaged wood, I heard the elevator ding, followed by heavy footsteps. "Mr. His," Step away from the door immediately." The authoritative voice of the building security guard cut through Robert's shouts. "This is his daughter's apartment. He has every right. You have no right to damage property or disturb residents. The police have been called." Robert's response was lost in the sound of approaching sirens outside. Minutes later, I watched through the peephole as 2 officers escorted my father down the hall, his wrists cuffed behind his back as he continued to yell that I was the one destroying our family. When the officer returned to take my statement, I calmly provided it, describing the financial manipulation, the attempts at unauthorized access, and today's outburst with the same detached precision I used in my documentation notebook. The officer, Rodriguez according to her badge, nodded thoughtfully as he took notes. "Would you like to press charges for attempted break-in?" The question hung in the air as Drew returned from speaking with building management about the damaged door. "Yes," I said, the words small but firm, "and I would like to request a restraining order." Later, as I watched the police car drive away with my father in the back seat, I wondered, was filing an official report too harsh a response to years of manipulation, or was it the necessary step to protect myself from further harm? Drew squeezed his shoulder gently. "Max is bringing some security cameras for the entrance. We'll install them tonight." I nodded, grateful for the practical support that asked for nothing in return. My phone buzzed with a message from Sophie. His mom took his laptop and camera from his room. Said it's collateral for what he owes her. The message hit me like a ton of bricks. More theft to add to the emotional assault he had committed for years. I typed a quick reply. "Do you know where she took him?" Sophie's reply came almost instantly. I heard her on the phone with Parkway Pawn Shop. She said she got $300 for him. $300. I showed the message to Drew, anger rising fresh and hot in my throat. He was worth over $2,000. "Do you have the receipts? Serial numbers?" I nodded, thinking of the meticulous documentation I kept for tax purposes. "Everything." An hour later, Officer Williams took my theft report with appropriate seriousness, examining my purchase receipts and writing down the serial numbers. "Pawning someone else's property is a crime," she explained, his tone professional but kind. "We'll contact the store and recover your items." The system that so often seemed against me was now working in my favor. A strange reversal that made me dizzy with possibility. That night, my phone began lighting up with calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. Aunt Sarah's message was the first I listened to. "Arthur, his dear, I heard about Robert's arrest. I'm so sorry. We had no idea things were that bad." The neighbors who witnessed Robert's outburst had apparently shared their observations, changing the public narrative my parents had tried to control. The story was spreading. Cracks were forming in the facade my parents had built. As I helped Max mount the security camera above Drew's door, another message from my mother arrived. The casual matter-of-factness of her words made my jaw clench. "I had to pawn her camera and laptop to cover the electric bill you left us. Parkway Pawn Shop on 4th Street. You owe me $300 plus interest." I handed the phone to Drew, who read it and shook her head in disbelief. "The delusion is almost impressive," she muttered, returning it. I saved the message as evidence, my anger not at her audacity, but at how long I had allowed her to convince me that I deserved such treatment. The revelation settled into determination as I finished setting up the camera that would capture any future attempts to invade the new boundaries I had built. This time, I was the one watching. And he was about to find out that when you provoke someone who has nothing left to lose, sometimes they discover they actually have everything to gain. My phone vibrated against the coffee table, my mother's name flashing on the screen. I had been waiting for this call. 3 days since I filed the police report about my stolen belongings, and they were finally ready to negotiate. "Arthur," Mom's voice trembled slightly. "I've been thinking about all this, and I want to propose a deal." I said nothing, letting the silence stretch between us. In the background, I could hear the television playing the same game show that used to fill our living room every weekday at this time. "If you withdraw this ridiculous theft report, you can come home. We'll let you continue living here, of course." His room is exactly as he left it. The rehearsed quality of her words was unmistakable. I imagined Dad hovering nearby, nodding approvingly at her performance. "And Arthur," she continued when I didn't respond, "I think we should discuss his mental state lately. Robert and I are concerned that he may be having some kind of breakdown. This is something our friends and family would understand better than what he's claiming happened. The threat landed with perfect clarity. Withdraw the accusations or be labeled unstable. I have copies of all the bills I've paid in the last 6 months, I said, my voice firm. I have bank statements showing transfers to his account. I have text messages asking me to pay for his cosmetic procedures that he claimed were medical necessities. I paused. Would you like me to present all of this as evidence? The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. The next morning, Officer Williams followed my car to my parents' house. His patrol car parked in the driveway sent a clear message to the neighbors who had been fed Robert's lies. As we walked to the front door, I noticed curtains moving in the windows across the street. Mom answered the door, his smile faltering when he saw the officer. Mrs. Mitchell, Officer Williams said, I'm here to accompany Arthur as he collects his remaining belongings. Inside, the house seemed smaller than I remembered. Mom hovered nearby as I headed straight for my room, Officer Williams following close behind. I had prepared copies of all my financial contributions. I have receipts for everything I'm taking, I told the officer, handing her a folder I had been compiling. Officer Williams flipped through the pages, her eyebrows rising. You paid for all of this while living here? Yes. For the past 6 months since my mother lost her job. Mom appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. This furniture belongs to the family, Arthur. You can't just take it all. I pulled a stack of receipts from my bag and held them up. I have receipts for everything I'm taking. Would you like to see them? Officer Williams studied my mother's face, then looked back at the financial records. The surprise in her eyes was unmistakable. Mrs. Mitchell, these documents show that his son has been supporting this household almost entirely on his own. Mom opened her mouth, then closed it. She backed down the hallway without another word. He worked methodically, packing books, clothes, and the remaining items that were unquestionably his. Through his bedroom window, he could see the neighbors watching from her balconies, pretending to water plants or check the mail. Let them see. Let them know the truth. When the last box was loaded into my car, I turned to lock the front door one last time. The sound of an engine drew my attention to the street. His car, his other car that he had left parked at Drew's apartment, pulled into the driveway. His father behind the wheel. His stomach dropped. The spare key. I had forgotten about the spare key I had given them for emergencies. Dad got out, waving my keys in his hand. Her expression was triumphant as he walked toward me. We need to discuss what you owe us before you take that too, she said, gesturing to the vehicle I was about to drive. I dropped the box I was holding and picked up a folder of documents I had been carrying precisely for this moment. This is the title to that car, I said, holding up the paper. And this is the registration, both in his name. Officer Williams stepped forward. Sir, this vehicle is registered to Arthur. You need to hand over the keys immediately. The color drained from Dad's face as he looked from the documents to the officer. Her hand tightened around the keys. I paid for his college. For his braces. 18 years of. The keys, Mrs. Mitchell. Officer Williams held out her hand. Slowly, Dad's fingers opened. The keys fell into the officer's palm with a soft clink. As she handed them to me, I saw something I had never witnessed before, the complete emptiness of my father. The man who had dominated our family for decades suddenly seemed small, diminished. Come near me or my property again, I said, my voice clear and calm, and I will file for a restraining order. I slid into my car, adjusted the mirror, and turned the key. As I pulled away from the curb, I saw the neighbors still watching, witnesses to the final act of our family drama. Mrs. Henderson from next door wasn't even pretending to check her mail anymore. She stood on her lawn, phone in hand, no doubt already spreading the news. In my rearview mirror, Sophie appeared at the door. She was caught between worlds, one foot in the house where our parents remained, one hand raised in a hesitant wave to her. His face reflected both sadness and something else, admiration perhaps, for the strength she had not yet found for herself. If he is following this journey of liberation from a toxic family, be sure to subscribe to the channel, because what happened in the next few days would change everything forever. I was 3 blocks away when my phone buzzed with a message. Sophie, they're blaming me now. What do I do? The light ahead turned red. I slammed on the brakes and stared at the screen, watching those 3 dots appear as she typed something else, then disappear. My sister, the only innocent party in all of this, was now where I had once been, carrying the weight of our parents' manipulation. The light turned green, but I remained stationary, cars honking behind me as I considered what to do next. 3 months had passed since I drove away from my parents' house with Officer Williams' business card tucked away in my wallet. The difference between then and now still surprises me sometimes. But as I methodically organized my final strategy at the kitchen table in my new apartment, a phone call came in that would turn my calculated revenge into something far more powerful than I had ever imagined. Arthur. My Aunt Phyllis's voice trembled over the phone. I need to tell you something about last weekend's family reunion. I stopped organizing my documents. What happened? Well, Robert was telling his side of the story when Mrs. Henderson showed up at my door. She said she couldn't stay silent anymore after seeing how you were treated. My heart raced. The neighbor who witnessed Dad's attack had decided to speak up. She brought other neighbors along too. They told her about the shouting, about you paying to fix his car, about her mother bragging about her cosmetic procedures. Phyllis paused. Arthur, the whole family knows the truth now. Robert and Denise left my house humiliated. This was it. No longer personal revenge, but public justice. The next morning, I laid everything out on the kitchen table like a general preparing for a final battle. Bank statements showing all the transfers I made to them. Receipts for every bill I paid. Screenshots of attempts to access my accounts. The security camera video showing Dad trying to break down my door. My phone rang. Mom. Arthur, dear, I think there's been a terrible misunderstanding. How about we have lunch today so we can talk civilly? Great idea, I replied calmly. Milano Restaurant, noon. But Mom. I paused. Bring Dad too. And get ready, because today you're going to hear some truths. I arrived 15 minutes early, strategically choosing a table in the center of the restaurant. I wanted everyone present to hear what was coming. My parents arrived punctually, his faces wearing that familiar expression of superiority I knew so well. Dad even smiled condescendingly as he sat down. Arthur, son, we think you may be going through a difficult time, he began. Maybe it's time for him to come home and... Stop. My voice cut through his words. You didn't come here to talk. You came to try to manipulate him once again. I placed the first stack of documents on the table. These are the statements from his secret account. $7,000 saved while I drained my savings to pay her bills. The color drained from Dad's face. How did you? Did you get this? I smiled coldly. You left the statements in my drawer when you went looking for his bank documents to try to steal from him. I placed the second stack. These are all the receipts for the bills I've paid over the last 6 months. $17,000 of his savings. For a family that called him a leech. People at the neighboring tables began to pay attention. Perfect. And this, I said, placing his phone on the table with the security camera video paused on the first frame, is him, Dad, trying to break down his door after attempting to steal his bank identity. The silence was deafening. Mom opened and closed her mouth like a fish out of water. You think you can kick me out of the house, steal my belongings, try to access my accounts, and then call me in for a friendly chat? My voice rose slightly, carrying to other tables. You think I'm still that naive son who accepts anything? Dad tried to compose himself. Son, you're causing a scene. I'm causing a scene? I laughed without humor. I wasn't the one who yelled and tried to break down a door. I wasn't the one who pawned belongings that weren't his. I wasn't the one who used health insurance for cosmetic procedures while lying about checkups. Mom turned completely pale. How could it be? Sophie told me about your swollen lips after your doctor's appointment. I made air quotes. Do you know how much his lip fillers cost? $400 of my insurance. While I was eating instant noodles to save money. The final revelation came like a well-aimed thrust. I pulled the last document from the folder. And this is a permanent restraining order against both of you. Attempted unauthorized access to bank accounts, theft, home invasion. Congratulations, you now have a criminal record. The waiter approached nervously. Is everything okay here? Perfect, she replied, putting her documents away. I was just explaining to my ex-parents why they will never again have access to her money, her house, or her life. I got up, leaving the bill on the table. Oh, and Dad? That boat you bought with the money you saved at my expense? I hope you enjoy it. Because now you'll need to sell it to pay her own bills. As I walked toward the exit, I heard Mom whisper desperately, "Arthur, please." I stopped and turned around one last time. You taught me that family is sacred. That we should take care of each other. I found out you were right. Except you never treated him like family. The entire restaurant was silent, all eyes fixed on our table. Now I'm going to take care of my real family. And you, well, you have each other. I left the restaurant feeling something I hadn't felt in months, complete peace. No anger, no sadness, just the crystal clarity of someone who had finally closed a chapter and was ready to write the next one. My phone rang when I got to the car. Sophie. Arthur, they came home crying. He is talking about selling the boat. Mom locked herself in her room. She paused. Did he do that? I did what needed to be done, I replied. And Sophie? His offer to share an apartment still stands. When he's ready to leave that house, call me. Thank you, her voice was heavy with emotion. Thank you for showing me that it's possible. As I drove back to my apartment, I realized that the sweetest revenge was not in her public humiliation, but in the freedom I had gained. Freedom to live without fear, without manipulation, without people who confuse love with financial control. The real triumph was not destroying his parents, but building a version of himself that would never again allow himself to be treated as less than he deserved. And that version was just beginning to discover what it was capable of. 6 months later, sunlight streams through the sheer curtains I chose for my living room. He is sitting on his new couch, flipping through college catalogs with a confidence I've never seen in her before. Final decision, University of Colorado, she announces, circling the environmental engineering program. Far enough to start over, close enough to visit you. I smile, remembering how she showed up at my door 3 months ago with a suitcase and the determination to follow my example. Did Mom and he react as expected? Dad blamed you for indoctrinating me. Mom cried about being alone. Sophie shrugs. But yesterday I heard them arguing about selling the house. Seems they've realized they can't pay the bills without a child supporting them. The irony of the situation doesn't escape me. The man who called me a leech now faces the reality of her financial choices. My phone rings. It's his boss congratulating me on the official promotion I got, the same one he was celebrating at that fateful New Year's Eve party that changed everything. Arthur, Sophie watches him organize his new contracts on the desk he bought with his own money, in his own apartment. Do you regret anything? I consider the question as I look around the space I've built. There's no expensive furniture or extravagant decor, but every item here was chosen by me, for me, without having to justify or defend my decisions. No, I answer honestly. I only regret that it took me so long to learn that true love never comes with monthly bills. The most profound transformation was not in my parents facing the consequences of their actions, but in discovering that worthiness is not something you prove through constant sacrifice. It is something you recognize and protect. Sophie hugs me before leaving for her job interview, her first job, which she got on her own merit. Thank you for showing me that it is possible to escape. Today, as I watch my sister build her independence and reflect on my journey from manipulation to liberation, I understand that the sweetest revenge was simple, to stop allowing myself to be treated as less than I deserved. If this story of courage to set boundaries has touched his life, subscribe to the channel for more stories about how to turn difficult moments into powerful new beginnings. The last contact I had from my parents was an envelope with no return address containing the deed to the house, which he had finally sold. Inside was a 2-word note, "You won." But it wasn't about winning. It was about finally learning that true family isn't who shares his blood, but who respects his boundaries.